Carlson wins it in overtime. Brady can drop, breakaway shoots, scores!
All right, everyone, we are joined by the voice of the Ottawa Senators on TSN 1200, Dean Brown. Dean, thank you so much for joining the show again, my friend. How have you been?
No problem. I've been very well, Brandon. How about you? Good summer so far?
Oh, it's been a great summer. You know, like we were just talking about, been busy, but busy is better than nothing, right? So I've been pretty busy, but it's just great to have you back on the show here for a second time. And we got a lot of things to talk about. A lot of stuff's happened since the last time you joined the show in the SENS world. So let's get it going here. You know, Ottawa has a new owner. And Michael Andlauer is the new owner. And I want to hear what you have to say about that. You've been around this organization since the beginning. It's been over 3 decades now, actually. So, you know, when you see good ownership, pardon me, what do you think about this owner and the future of the Ottawa Senators?
Well, you know, Brandon, I've never met the man. I've never had the privilege to meet him yet, and I'm sure I will at some point, but I haven't met him yet. So all I can go by is the people that I know who have met him, who do know him, or in one case, somebody who works for him. And the reviews are all great. You know, that he's a very driven guy. Obviously, you don't become a billionaire by just kind of bumping around things. So, you know, he's a motivated, driven kind of guy, and he wants to win. And, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else doesn't want to win. Everybody wants to win. But he is one of those guys where I think from what I've been told, he's a very laser focused kind of guy. When he focuses in on something, he wants it very badly, and that's the kind of guy he is. I have a friend who actually works for him now and says he's a great boss. You know, he's a guy that wants to know what you need to do your job, and he's going to facilitate that. And so don't bother him with fluff and stuff like that. But if you need something to do what you need to do, you talk to him and it gets done. And on a broader sense, I was talking last year when we were in Edmonton. I went out for lunch with a friend of mine who has been a very good friend of Mr. Andlauer's for a very long time. And at that time, this was before, you know, there was any, you know, bidding or, you know, none of that had started yet. And he told me that Ottawa would be in very, very good shape if Mr. Andlauer ended up getting the team, because he's the kind of guy where there's not going to be any shortcuts. There's not going to be any trimming of the edges. What's needed to get things done will be available, and he would be a very good guy to own this team. So, you know, from that respect, I think that's an outstanding thing. But again, you know, I don't personally, for me, it's all secondhand information, but I very much trust the people that I've talked to, because they've been very long time personal friends of mine who happen to also have a personal relationship with Mr. Andlauer. So I trust their judgment implicitly. So I'm really optimistic, and I just think it's so exciting for our city that you have new ownership and you have, you know, a new building on the horizon, and this team, you know, whether Mr. Andlauer is going to own this team or not, this team is on the verge of making the playoffs and being a really competitive team for a really long time. So that's super exciting. So I just think, Brandon, it's a really, really good time to be involved with the Ottawa Senators.
Couldn't agree more. I think we're in the right position at the right time, Dean. I absolutely agree, though, on Michael Andlauer. He did great things with Hamilton in the OHL. He has a good relationship with the fans in Montreal. And that relationship, like you kind of touched on earlier, is key, especially in a city like this, a big city with a small town feel, more importantly, a rabid fan base like we have here in Ottawa. You need to have that connection between the organization and, you know, the fan base. We haven't had that for the last little bit. And that's been a big thing with Michael Andlauer and with Hamilton, for example, with Montreal. I'm looking forward to see that here in Ottawa as well. But talking about cutting corners and stuff, I mean, just looking at the AHL signings, I mean, we had some massive signings the last couple of days in free agency for the AHL. We haven't done that before, and that's what the best teams in the NHL do. They invest in their minor system. They invest in the AHL. They invest to build a good team around their prospects. We signed some good players like Matthew Highmore, Pilon from Hershey, for example. There's some really good players making nearly $500,000 each in the AHL. That's a good sign of what's to come, because like you said, you need to invest, you need to put money in to get it done, and that's what's happening so far in the AHL, and of course, in the NHL with a massive free agent signing the other day, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, with new ownership, What do you expect over the next year or so in terms of just rebuilding that connection between the organization and the fan base with Michael Andlauer? What do you want to be done differently? Just kind of to get your headspace on that.
Well, you know what? I expect there's going to be an awful lot of community outreach, but you know what? In saying that, Brandon, it's not like that hasn't existed already. Like when Mr. Melnick owned the team, when Mr. Melnick was alive, people had their feelings about Mr. Melnick. But within the organization and how, the marketing department and the community involvement department, how they worked and operated, they went out and did their thing. And, there was great community outreach. And, they're not, those people who work within the organization, they're not going to change the attitude that people might have had about the owner, but they're still out there doing their thing and raising money for charity and, all the other things that happen. And so that's going to continue. There might be a bit different focus, and there might be, some things that Mr. Andlauer brings to the table in that regard, or maybe not. He's also going to hire a lot of people that people don't know. Like there's a lot of people within an organization. Generally, the people only know the public faces they see. Usually the president, all the people on the hockey side, the players. But there's 100 other people or more that they never see that play huge roles and have huge impact in the perception that people have of this team. And those people will either keep on doing what they're doing, or they'll have people added to their departments to do more of it, or there'll be new people. So, there's going to be those changes, but there's no team, especially in Canada, that doesn't make a true connection with its fan base unless they go out and make it. They've got to take the steps to go out and make it. And I'm not going to say for a second that this team hasn't been doing that. They have. But I think that when they go out now, there's going to be a different attitude that they encounter when they go out there. And I think that could make it a real symbiotic reconjuring of the fan base here in Ottawa over the next, I think we're going to see it this year, because the other thing that's the truth is that people get more excited if the team is more exciting. And this is an exciting team that's going to win more games. And that is just by itself, that's the best marketing in any pro sport is, winning and having an exciting team. So, that's going to help in that whole process.
Right. Winning fixes everything. That's for sure. I will say this, especially with an organization. Look, like you said yourself, the NHL, NHL, and even ECHL. There's a lot of levels to this. It's a massive organization. No one really thinks about that. So I'm glad you brought that up. But just like cutting the corners like in the past, Michael Andlauer, you saying he's not going to do that, that is great news, because Ottawa, just in the front office alone, has a very, very thin staff. I can only imagine within the organization, even thinner. In fact, I know it's thin. So being able to bring in more and more people, it only benefits. Because here at SENS Talk, I'm not comparing the Ottawa Senators to my blog, but the comparison could be made in terms of having more voices, because when you have more voices within an organization, you have better ideas, more refined, and you can bounce, you just get more ideas and different voices. You don't want to have the same old. You want to have everyone, so many different people with different perspectives and ideas. So I think that's really exciting for the organization. And I'm really excited for Mr. Andlauer and the local, elements to this bid as well, like Claridge Homes, Neil Malhotra, and there's so many other people, York from Farm Boy. I mean, there's a lot of local elements to this bid as well. I think that's also important. Just not even talking about the fan base connection with the organization, the business community connection with the organization, which has been fixed over the last little bit, but still could use a little bit more amending, of course, will be huge with 20 local investors in the business community here in Ottawa being involved. So I think that's the biggest part there, is you're getting a stable owner, of course, with Michael Andlauer, with deep pockets that is committed, to building a successful organization through the entire way. But at the same time, you have local investors involved in the consortium within the ownership bid, I guess you can call it, that can help in other elements that are absolutely necessary to keep this organization running for decades and decades and decades to come. So like you said already, I'm very excited for what the future brings with Mr. Andlauer. It's an exciting time for Ottawa, new building potentially, which will help the city, of course, the downtown core, which desperately needs it. So it's just an exciting time to be a Sens fan. And then that's not even talking about the stuff on the ice, like you alluded to, Kachuk and Stützle and Norris and Sanderson and Pinto, and the list goes on. There's so many great players. So the future really has never been brighter as of late anyways here in Ottawa. So welcome to Ottawa, Michael Andlauer. We're excited to have you. And I think we'll move on now, because Michael Andlauer, the whole delay on ownership kind of, in some people's perceptions anyways, had an effect on the coaching decision making. Pierre Dorion, at the end of the season in April, at his end of the season press conference, mentioned that he hasn't made a decision on DJ Smith. He's still thinking about it. Then he'll make a recommendation to the bidder. Of course, that recommendation, as he said later on recently, was to keep DJ Smith and his entire coaching staff. Now, I personally like DJ Smith. I think he's a fun guy, a hell of a character. Clearly, the guys in the locker room like and respect him, and you have to respect him for the culture he's made here in Ottawa. However, he's a great guy, yeah, but it's a business. We haven't gotten the results. So I'm okay with keeping DJ Smith, especially at this point. You're not going to fire him. And if the guys like him and they're vouching for him, give him another shot. I understand that. But the fact we haven't seen any change in the coaching staff is a little shocking to me. I'm not saying anyone specifically should be fired. I just, after a few years of failed starts, you would have figured there would have been a change. But it's safe to say that there's a short leash on this coaching staff now.
I would think that, going into the new year, you have to see far better start than they've seen in the last couple of years. But, and I realize it's a hot topic within the fan base. And I realize there's, when I say what I'm going to say, there's going to be a constituency of that fan base that think I'm a complete idiot and a suck up to the coach. But I would not have entertained changing the coaching staff at all. For a couple of reasons. And it's not just because I know them and I like them. It's not a personal thing. For me, you kind of nudged into it, but a huge thing, as we've just seen in Calgary, if your best players aren't committed to the coach and don't believe in what the coach is doing, you don't have a team. And it also means you can't sign other players. Players now, they talk to each other on different teams all around the league. Guys used to play with. Players talk to each other all the time. And, what happened in Calgary with Sutter is not only did guys not want to resign and guys not want to keep playing, they couldn't get any guys to be interested as free agents to come in because they didn't want to play for them because they've talked to their friends who didn't enjoy it.
Not one player signed in Calgary on day one of free agency. Not even AHL. No one.
Yeah. So, what? It's one of those things. And in Ottawa's best players, they would run through a wall for this guy. Number one. Number two, as a coach, he has never, as an Ottawa Senators head coach, had his full roster. There's always been guys that either are not in camp because of contract situations, guys who are injured. He's never had Ottawa's best roster while he's been here, number one. And when people say, well, he hasn't made the playoffs in 6 years, my question would be, did you think any coach was getting this team to the playoffs in the first four?
Yeah,
first four. And then the year that they probably should have, and I thought probably could have made the playoffs, is the COVID year. And they were one of the teams just in man games lost to COVID, one of the, if not the hardest hit teams in the league, plus all the injuries they suffered. People say you can't use injuries as an excuse. Well, when you don't have organizational depth to be able to fill those roles or hope to, and Ottawa wasn't in a spot to do that because they were going through a rebuild. So, just when people say, well, he's had 6 years. Well, he's had 2 years. Really, with a team that, you should be able to start being able to make strides with, it's been 2 years. And my question always is when people say, well, the system is just, their system. First thing I always ask those people is, what do you think the system is? The irony is that's a go-to for somebody that isn't seeing what they want to see, but they don't really know what they're looking at. When you ask somebody who says the system's not very good, well, what do you think it is? And people can't tell you what it is. So it's one of those things where, well, if you want to play hockey expert and tell me that the system doesn't work, you tell me what the system is and how you change it.
From what I've watched, offensively speaking, the team could score. So there's no issue offensively with the system, but defensively, and DJ kind of touched up on this on Ian Mendes' article, I think like a week ago or so. By the way, check it out. Great article, great quotes there. But in the article, he mentioned defensively speaking, they get caught a lot in the slot, in the front, way too often. It's wide open. They're usually caught behind the net or along the boards. They're basically what that means is they're losing the board battles or they're getting caught puck watching behind the net, leaving the slot open. Now, I'm not an expert Obviously, I'm just making YouTube videos. I'm not going to claim to be, but obviously anyone can see that. So DJ Smith did touch up on that in Ian's article and said they have to clean that up. Of course, they have to play tighter. They have to play stronger. It all comes down to the board battles. If you win the board battles, I mean, this is why when Tkachuk's on the ice, you don't really see these mistakes because he's so dominant on the boards. And then you have a guy like Stützle down the middle. Good luck taking the puck off those two guys, right? So you can't have a Tkachuk on every line, but you got to play like you do. They have to win these board battles. You can't leave the front of the net open. And if you do those two little things, everything else should form. These are good hockey players. You got Zub, you got Chychrun, you got Sanderson, you got Shabbat, Brandstrom, JBD, maybe Hamonic. The list goes on. A lot of good defensemen there. And in the top six, I mean, these are great players. They just have to play more structurally, and they have to play much tougher. And in the boards, once again, they lose the board battles. And once again, I say this even when I criticize DJ Smith, which is fine. You know, it's sports. You're supposed to criticize.
Sure, absolutely.
I say he can't be on the ice with these guys either. Sometimes you got to blame the players. I mean, you got to play tougher. There's players like Batherson, for example, at times where he hasn't back-checked. You just have to have a little more accountability, which DJ Smith touched on, with the players. So I think it goes hand in hand. I think some systems need to be touched and fixed on with the coaching staff, but the players also have to play a little stronger along the boards, back-check a little harder, and play a little tighter. So I think now, especially with this year, with all the expectations with Giroux and Chychrun and new ownership and everything, we expect the playoffs. I think the pressure is not only on DJ Smith, but it's also on this core. They don't want to flank out 3 years in a row. That doesn't look good for them either. So I think we're going to see a really committed and energetic team going into this year because they want to prove people wrong. They're sick and tired, I think, of people telling them that they're a joke, that they only can score, they can't defend. And I think honestly, with the blue line, the way it looks, and the offensive top six, and the new goalie, which we'll talk about in a bit, I think Ottawa is geared up to really surprise and show people what they're really made of and what we have expected here anyways for the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, you know, you were kind of making my point there when you're going through a lot of the issues. You know, losing board battles isn't a system issue. That's a player issue. And but you know what I mean? Like there's so many of those things. You lose contain. Well, that's the system didn't lose contain. You know, where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to do, that's not a part of those kinds of shortcomings. And ironically, as this team has gotten better, you know, it's largely because the players have gotten better. And so as you add more good players and the players you have get more experience and get better, all those things start to fade away. The reality is, whether you like DJ Smith or you don't like DJ Smith, almost every single metric for this team went up this past year. Forget about analytics, almost every single base stat. I mean, just like literally the most rudimentary stats. Goals against, goals for, shots for, you know, almost every single stat went up. Power play went up. Penalty killing went up. If they had been as good in the last month of the season as they were the rest of the season, they would have had a top 10 power play and a top 10 penalty kill.
Oh,
so
sure.
all of the numbers, all the stats are all going in the right direction. And the only thing that puzzles me is when the team isn't playing well, you blame the coach and the system. When they are playing well, it's because they have good players. You know what I mean? Like you have to judge both. And hey, as fans have the right to, you know, they have the right to have their opinions. And if you don't like DJ Smith and you want him replaced, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you why I think that he should, and the coaching staff should still be the coaching staff, and why I think that this year is the year where you find out if they really are, because you can't tell about tell about injuries, and that's a huge part for every team, not just this one. But this will be a team where they start the season where in almost everyone's mind this is a playoff team. So yes, that's how they have to play. And if they don't, then I agree with you. I think there would be a change rather early on, because you don't want to squander a season. You want to make a change early. But I would not have been in the camp at all to replace DJ Smith or the coaching staff. And I know that will cause some people who are watching this to go, well, Brown's an idiot. Brown's just sucking up to the coach. Or, you know, I get that. That's part of the deal for us too. You know, like players have to take criticism, guys who do my job. But all I can tell you is what I honestly think. And if I honestly thought DJ shouldn't be the coach, I would say it's probably time for a change. But I really don't believe that.
Well, as you should. You know, you shouldn't lie just to pander to people. Always say,
yeah, that's easy. That's easy.
Exactly. This is how I am too. I say how I feel, and I get some heat for sometimes. that's how it is. It makes things interesting. Life's not supposed to be how everyone wants it. Everyone has to have a different opinion. That's the way it should be. But with DJ Smith, another thing I would say just about systems, Shabbat a lot, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, they have often the defenseman chip in a lot, leaving one guy back. If you can just have both the defensemen just kind of anchor to the blue line a bit, you have the offensive guys like Kachuk and Stützle. Let these guys do their work. We often, quite often anyways, in the neutral zone or along the blue line, gave up the puck and on-man rushes the other way. Doesn't make it any easier for the goalie. So maybe, I don't know, once again, I'm not a coach, so I don't know what these exact specifications would be, but often Shabbat especially, and he was overplayed, so it's not his fault. I mean, I could only imagine. The guy was playing 30 plus minutes a night, but often he was caught pinching up, losing a board battle, and then suddenly it's a 2-on-1 the other way or 3-on-1, and Zub, what the hell is Zub supposed to do, right? So I think there's a bit more defensive accountability. I think accountability has to be the key word here. Just play stronger defensively. And however that happens, I don't care as long as it happens, right? Because I'm a fan. I'm just trying to watch games, enjoy the games, and as a journalist, cover the games. So I'm going to be critical, but I'm also going to be realistic. It's like you said yourself, it's the coach, it's the players. They need to work together and get it done. And I think this year, like you said, we're going to see what happens with that. And I would expect, maybe I'm a little biased, don't really know, might be a little biased, but I do expect to see things turn around here. And once again, like you said yourself, these guys would run through a wall for DJ Smith. So with that, I'm very confident that they can turn things around as long as they really, really hold each other accountable and work stronger and harder. Because once again, I mean, I don't mean to single out Batherson, but there was a lot of lackluster back checks, and it's just, you got to be stronger defensively if you're going to be a playoff team. It is what it is. I mean, If you look at goaltending here in Ottawa, I mean, we've had terrible luck in the net, of course, in terms of injuries and whatever, but when you see guys like Gustafsson, for example, go over to Minnesota and see how they have a good structured defense and how he's blossomed, I mean, he could have done that here in Ottawa with a bit more structure and better guys in front of him too. So it's just about getting better structure in front of the goalie, because I think, and we'll talk about Korpisalo in a second here, but I think with better structure in front, you're not going to see goalies giving up 1,000 goals like we've seen a lot. A lot of high danger chances happen here in Ottawa. So if you just tighten it up defensively, any goaltender can play with a good defense in front of them, is what I'm basically trying to say. So if we just tighten it up just a little bit defensively, the goals will come, the saves will be made, and we're going to be okay. It's just, once again, it's a young team. Defense always is an issue for young players. Maybe we really shouldn't be surprised that this is an issue, but once again, like you said yourself, there's been a few years of this. This is the year. They're not young players anymore. They're established NHLers. It's time to show the league that you can play both ends of the ice. So really excited to see what happens with that. And I like how we kind of agree and disagree on the DJ Smith thing. I think at the end of the day, we both agree that it's on both player and coaching to be held accountable, and they have to get some results this season. Now, moving on now to Alex DeBrincat. This situation's been very fascinating to watch. From the trade last year at the draft with Chicago, giving up a first, second, and third. Still like that trade, I'll be honest with you. I mean, it was worth a gamble. The guy's a 40-goal scorer. He's a young player fitted to the mold of this team and the future it has. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like he wants to extend here long-term anyways. It looks like he wants to test free agency, which is his right. I get it. He's going to be 26. He has a kid. He has a family. He wants to do what's best for him and his family. You have to respect that. This is a game, of course, but these are also human beings. But it's July 3rd. We still haven't seen a trade. The free agency has been opened up for now 72 hours. And kind of wondering where you are at with this whole Alex DeBrincat situation. How do you think it unfolds, and where do you think it goes?
Well, for me, and I've said this many, many times, I think lots of times in discussion, and if you're on any of the services and you're reading things, I think a lot of times people believe that the single and most important and oftentimes the most consuming decision-making process that a player goes through when deciding about things in his career are based on money. And in a lot of cases, that's not true. It's one of the things. It's always one of the things. There's no question about it. Obviously. But players make decisions based on a lot of different things, and one of the biggest ones is where they want to live. Because by and large, in a cap world, by and large. It might change a little bit, but a couple of $100,000 here, $100,000 there, and over the course of an 8-year contract, that might be $1 million, but you'd lose half of that in taxes almost any place you played, other than a few states in the United States that don't have any tax. But so players make choices based on where they want to live. I think in this case, and I don't know because he's never told me this, but just being around and watching, I think Alex really enjoys his teammates. I think that Alex likes playing on this team. And I think that he knows that he's going to be a 40-goal scorer again. He's had plenty of chances, and it just didn't click for him as many times as it could have or should have this year. But I think he knows that that's still in his game. But there's other lifestyle choices. He's got a young wife and a young child. They're both Americans. They've never lived in Canada. And I think that one of the things why he won't sign here long-term is that he's an American and he might want to live in the United States, as does his wife. And you can't fault a guy for that. That's where you want to live. And if you can, angle a way to have your cake and eat it too, make the money you want to make and play in a city that you want to live in, good for you. And I don't begrudge any player that. But, I think that the team has done what they can do in asking his agent for a list of teams that he'd like to go to, and then you go and try and make a deal with one of those teams because, excuse me, you're going to make the best deal for a player if they have the chance to sign him long term. So you go and check out the teams that he might want to go to see if you can get that long term deal. Then Ottawa's going to get the most back for him.
Yeah,
it just appears now that might not be the case. Of the 4 or 5 teams that he gave them a list, there's a couple of teams that aren't interested at all, and I understand it's tough fitting in a big salary like that for a team you're moving him to.
Yeah.
And a couple of other teams are interested, but not in signing him to a long-term deal. So that puts him in an awkward situation as far as getting that part of it. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the end deal is going to be here. Maybe he signs short-term and stays here. And I hope that people don't, feel, negative towards him because he doesn't want to sign here long-term. Mark Stone didn't want to sign here long-term either, and he's still beloved here, He was offered a deal here that was in actual cash, more money than he got in Vegas, but he wanted to sign long-term for a team that he thought could win the Stanley Cup. And he was right, and he did. And, he at his age didn't want to be part of a long rebuild. Well, if Mark was still here, he'd just be getting to the point where he'd be the oldest guy, one of the oldest guys on a team that's just now becoming a playoff team. So, I totally understand. I understood it then. I understand it now. And so for Alex, if those are the reasons why he doesn't want to sign here long term, I get that. I wish it was a different way, but I get that. But how it's all going to end, I'm not positive, Brandon, it's going to end the way he and his agent envisioned it, because I'm just not sure after a 27-goal season, there's a lot of teams that want to sign a guy long term for a guy who was a 40-goal scorer, but there's no guarantee he will again. Mm-hmm. So do you want to sign a guy long-term who's coming off a 27-goal season and you want to pay him 40-goal scorer money? That's the awkward part for teams that are looking for a player like that, and a time where fitting a $9 million contract into your salary structure is not an easy thing to do.
And that's why I think there's a difference between, I'm not saying you, but I know a lot of people made this comparison between Mark Stone and DeBrincat. And yeah, I get it. They're in the same similar type of situation. But with Mark Stone, firstly, like you said yourself, he obviously wanted to win a Stanley Cup. Yep. The time here in Ottawa was completely different. And Pierre Dorion on a podcast recently said that he offered a contract and it was kind of nixed, it was kind of rejected by ownership as well. So that's the difference here. There's a commitment to get DeBrincat signed from the organization side, but like you said, for different reasons, like any player should have, just like you or I, if we're looking for employment, have different reasons. So once again, I completely understand that he's not Canadian, he's American. His wife, his kid are American. They're young. This is a long-term. We're talking about nearly a decade. Okay, this is a long-term commitment
for sure.
And you can't fault the player for wanting to be in his home country. You can't. It makes sense. If you had an offer to continue living here or in your hometown, or live far, far away from all your friends and family, you're taking your hometown or your where you live right now. That's just where that makes the most sense. So with DeBrincat, that's the difference. There's no malice. I don't think anyone should be boo him, be disrespectful. This is why players don't want to come to Canada to begin with. You got to stop with that nonsense. I mean, it's not like it's not personal. It's not like he's saying, "Oh, I hate Ottawa. It's a terrible city, terrible." Like, then okay. I mean, that's something else. But he has not said anything whatsoever to rationalize that type of reaction. You shouldn't boo somebody because they made a personal decision that they think is best for their family. Just like you would, just like I would, just like everyone watching this would. So with the DeBrincat, yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you. I think they definitely have overplayed their hand, however. I don't think they're going to be able to find an 8-year deal outside of Ottawa, at least for the next year. I think the best case for both people, in terms of the organization and the player and, his camp, would be sign a bridge deal, sign for 3 years. He's 25. He'll get to 28. He will be in his prime by then. He can sign for 5 years after that. He's still going to make 40-plus goal scorer money on a 2-3-year deal here in Ottawa. He can sign at 28 for 5 to 7 years like most players do. He'll command a lot of money. He's going to score a lot of goals. You're telling me this guy won't score goals with Stützle or Norris next to him? No, he's going to score goals. So if he signs here for 2 or 3 years, and I don't think it's going to happen, but if he did, he can sign again long-term wherever he wants when he basically is, buying into himself, right? He's banking on the fact that he's going to rebound and be able to recover from this. So I think for both sides, a 2 or 3 year deal, including maybe the 1 year of arbitration, so maybe a 2-year extension, whatever you want to call it, I think works for both sides. You keep him for a couple more years. It gives Ottawa a bit of extra room to, kind of see, should we keep him? Maybe we can trade him with a bit of extra length on the contract. It gives everyone flexibility, and it doesn't keep him in a weird lingo where he's on an arbitration contract on a qualification for 1 year, and everyone in the entire season, you know how Canadian media is, you know how the fans are like, you and I, they're going to ask 24/7, you're going to be traded. Are you going to resign? Are you going to be traded? You're going to be, it's going to be a whole thing all year. So I think if you can avoid that situation, that would be best. I don't know if that's going to be possible. But also just looking at Ottawa's roster situation, it also has effects on that. I mean, we're talking about at minimum $7.6 million and at max $9 million. No matter what, that's a lot of money on the books there for one player. So if he is brought back, what happens now with the bottom six? Can we afford an extension for Pinto? Can we afford to bring in a couple of depth wingers? Can we afford the Korpisalo signing, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, which I think we'll be able to be affording just fine. But once again, the DeBrincat situation has more implications than just the player. It has implications on the entire roster because Ottawa is already very cap constrained with all the buyouts and stuff as well. So it's going to be really interesting. I don't expect to see a trade for a while. Ian Mendez and Garriock both have touched up on this recently, saying that just like Matthew Tkachuk with Calgary, as we get closer to the arbitration hearing, we probably should see more movement around a trade and contract negotiations with another team, especially when teams get more desperate if they don't get the players they wanted in free agency. We see that often. It's why I didn't want to trade them for pennies on the dollar at the draft. Teams are going to lose out on players in free agency, and they're going to buy. That's what happens, and I'm banking on that for sure. So I think later on in the summer, probably August, we'll probably see a trade or some sort of an extension. We're going to see some sort of resolution, in my opinion, to this in August for sure. But it just sucks once again because it does have implications on the rest of the roster. And I was kind of wondering, before we talk about Korpisalo, that's the last thing we'll talk about, just in terms of free agency and forwards and defensemen and depth that we bring in, who would you target? And do you think we should target anyone at all, especially with the cap implications potentially of bringing back or, giving up DeBrincat?
Well, I don't know who they should target. I haven't sat down and looked at the list around the league or, gone through what pro scouting goes through, identifying people you might want to trade for. All I know is that they need to have somebody in the bottom six that is going to bring what Austin Watson is taking with him, which is somebody who can help out in the penalty kill and somebody who can drop the gloves every now and then so Brady doesn't have to do it as often. Even though there's lots of people who think that that's not a part of the game you should worry about, it's still a part of the game.
Very
it's,
so.
In the NHL, there's fights. So you have to have people that are willing to do that. But I think most importantly is that, nobody on any team anticipates that your bottom six is going to produce what your top six does. But you can't have the kind of, huge disparity that Ottawa's had between the goal production from the bottom and the top. And so I'm not expecting them to go out and sign a bunch of 20-goal scorers to play in the third and fourth lines, but you have to get more than single digits from almost every guy.
Yes.
So you have to go out there and look in the marketplace or within your own organization and find people who can play a role, be a role player, but still generate some offense, because the offense is certainly important, but you have to balance that with third and fourth line players need to be able to execute a role. This idea that some people have is just, they should promote that guy because he had, this many goals in the AHL. Yeah, but can he check? Can he be a penalty killer? Can he be a 50-50 guy? Can
role in the AHL as well, which is important.
Yes, exactly. So, it's not just going through your AHL roster, getting the best scorer and bring him up and putting him on the fourth line. If he's not a fourth line player that's used to playing that kind of a role, then he's not going to produce the numbers that he produced offensively, and he's not going to be good at the role. So that's the balancing act there. It's not as easy as people think it is to fill those roles, because it is a delicate balance. And you want youthful legs, but you don't want to have kids. You want to have a veteran guy, but not a guy who's over the hill. And so it's one of those things where in many ways it's more difficult for a lot of teams to fill out those third and fourth lines with the right kind of players than it is with your top six, because stars and offensive players are easy to spot. You look through the stats, who they are, and keeping them is the hard part in this league, but getting, defining who they are is not an issue. Third and fourth line players, that's a more delicate kind of professional attribute that a lot of general managers and scouts, the good ones, they have that ability. So that's what you have to go out and look for. And that's what this team needs. They have to get some kind of decent production out of the bottom six while maintaining the idea that roles have to be fulfilled.
Without a doubt. I mean, looking at the stats, Derek Brassard was Ottawa's leading goal scorer and point getter in the bottom six. He's not returning. He has a devastating injury. He might not play again. Hopefully I'm wrong. I do hope he skates and, laces them up again, but we'll have to see what happens with that. But that's unacceptable. I'm sorry. He was on a PTO. He was signed a week or two before the beginning of the regular season. It's just can't be that way. You had one player, which was Brassard, scoring 10 plus goals. You had one player, Brassard, scoring 20 plus points. You didn't have any other player scoring 20 plus or 10 plus goals. So no one was producing points in that bottom six. So I agree. You can't sign a star, or you can't bring up, one of your top goal scorers in the AHL played on the fourth line, but that's why you need to bring in somebody in free agency for $1 million or $2 million. I mean, Daniel Sprong, for example, with Detroit would have been incredible. $2 million for a 21 goal scorer last year. 10, 15 goals is all we're looking for on that third line. That would have been great. Nola Chari, who's somebody I really, 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 really would have loved. He has that grit. He can fight. He can score. Perfect for that fourth line. He went to, I think he went to Pittsburgh. Same thing with Hathaway. He also got signed. So the depth options, the bottom six wingers are really flying off the market right now. Pius Suter, for example, which Ottawa has had interest in the past before, I believe, is available. That's somebody I would bring for the third line, some goal scoring. And then, for the fourth line, you can definitely find a bang and crash type of guy for the fourth line out there, but you got to do it quick, because you still want to be able to keep up with the game. You can't just be a guy out there fighting and then going off. It's not 2005. You need a guy that can fight. He can also score. He can also back check, keep up. He can hit. He can bring other elements. So once again, don't know who that is. I have to look into it deeper. I've named some offensive guys for the bottom six, but physicality speaking, I mean, the guys I wanted are already gone. So the pickings are slim already. So chop, TikTok, pardon me. You got to get this done, Pierre Dorion, very soon. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, once again, you don't want to put like Igor Sokolov on the fourth line. It just doesn't make any sense. He's a goal scorer. He's not the best skater. And when we did that last year, he was okay. He didn't get killed defensively, but he was invisible offensively. And there's a reason for that. So you need to find the players for the proper role. And hopefully we do that. I mean, Boku Amama, who we signed out of Arizona, he's played some NHL games. He's a fighter. We might see him in the NHL this year. Who knows? But you want somebody with that established NHL experience. So I do hope Ottawa can bring in at least one more person to at least compete with Boko and maybe even beat him out and be the fourth line enforcer type role. Because once again, you want somebody that can bring, of course, that intangible of fighting and physicality, but also can play and has a lot of NHL experience. So we'll see what happens with that. I mean, once again,
Yeah.
I bring up Boko's name because
Yep.
he's played NHL minutes. It's definitely possible. If you're looking for a physical fighter, he can be your guy without a doubt. But once again, I think, you also want to have competition there. You don't want to just give him the spot. You want to have a little bit of internal competition. And I think it would always be good as well to have two guys, not just one, two guys that can fight. Worst case, Boko's in the AHL and NHL going back and forth. You have a permanent guy here on the depth chart on the bench or on the fourth line. It doesn't matter. The point is, you don't want to have one option. You want to have a couple because you don't want to just have Tkachuk fighting all the time. So we'll see what happens with that. Another player I wanted to mention, by the way, quickly for the blue line, we kind of mentioned earlier, Travis Hamonic might come back, but he just signed, I think, a 7-year deal with the New York Islanders. Scott Mayfield would have been perfect for Ottawa. This guy's top 10 in blocked shots. This guy's a physical player, fantastic defender, very underrated, stay-at-home defenseman. Would have been perfect, but he's off the market too. So that's unfortunate. But I want to ask you this, Dean. I know it's been about 40 minutes or so. I don't want to keep you for too longer, but I have to ask you this. Joonas Korpisalo, 5 years, $4 million. The Finnish goaltender is 29 years old, coming off a fantastic year with Columbus and LA, leading the Kings to the Stanley Cup playoffs and having to face off against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And that epic power play in the playoffs was not easy, but he made some nice stops and forced a very good series to the brink. What do you think about Joonas Korpisalo and the signing here in Ottawa?
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I really like the signing and I really like the player, but I look back on, I'm not going to comment on anybody else's perspective, but just on my perspective, I was huge on Matt Murray. I thought that was a great signing. I thought that was a franchise-altering signing, and clearly it did not work out, nor did it work out for him in Toronto. He just can't seem to stay healthy enough to be a good player. And, when they ridded themselves of that issue, I thought that was some very good work by the general manager. I didn't think the player was movable. And so I thought that was very good work by Pierre Dorion to extricate himself from that situation. And then I thought it was a fantastic move to sign Talbot, a veteran guy, an all-star. And so I thought that was a fantastic move. And then when Cam was here, anytime he played, when he was healthy, he was a pretty good player. But again, the problem was he couldn't stay healthy. And, he now is signed in LA for $1 million a year just to try and stay in the league, Yeah, so my track record in commenting and having an assessment of a goalie, starting goalie signing is 0 for 2 right now. So I'm trying to be pretty cautious.
You want to strike out.
Yeah, but all things being equal, when he's played, when I've seen him, when I've called games that he's played in, Joonas Korpisalo has been very good. And you're right about what he did in Los Angeles last year. And I think that, when you look at his contract, 5 years, that's probably a bigger bite than a lot of people would have liked. But what I liked about it was, if you see how the money gets dispersed, it's lower in the bottom 3 years of the contract, especially the last 2 years. So if you want to move them later on, or it's just not working out, it's a contract that will be attractive to other teams. So you've created some extrication moves if you need to use them. And if it does work, you've got a goalie at a really good pay scale for 5 years, during the prime of his career. So that's the upside. So I really like the deal. I think if he plays the way we've seen him when he's been in his groove, he is exactly what the doctor ordered for Ottawa. And if it turns out like the last two, it just doesn't happen, you've got a way to get out of it. So overall, I like it, and we just have to see how he does. I think the only thing is, if you look at over his career, the number of games or the number of seasons where he has been his team's designated starter, the number one goalie, I think you'd like that number to be higher.
Yeah.
But I think, coming out of his hip surgery 2 years ago, he was certainly a lot better last year. And I think this year he'll be even better. So, I think physically he is in a place that's a good place for Ottawa to pick him up, because, having the double hip surgery 2 years ago for a goalie, that's a pretty major thing. And he obviously rebounded pretty well last year in the second half of the season. And I think now you're getting him when he's back at 100% with some, everything physically is working properly. So I hope it's going to be a good signing for this team.
Well, I touched up on this in my signing reaction video. I completely agree with you. I mean, there are backups in the National Hockey League making less than Korpisalo, who's projected to be the starter. Most importantly, yeah, he might have not been the prototypical starter in Columbus. He was the 1A, 1B with Lincolns. But for the most part, he was the 1A. And that's all you need here in Ottawa. You don't need him to start 60-plus games like Hellebuck or Saros or whatever. You need him to start 40 to 50.
Exactly.
Another 30. Maybe Sogard comes in for 5 if they get injured, God forbid, or they need a bit of a break. That can happen. You can have them play 70, 75 games. Sogard can step in for 5 or so. You can have a three-way tandem here, basically, but primarily with the 2. By the way, these two, they've played together. In 2016, won the Calder Trophy with the Cleveland Monsters of the AHL. They're friends. They spoke with each other, Pierre Dorion said, within 20 minutes after free agency opened up. Forsberg definitely played a big role in swaying Korpisalo coming to Ottawa. Because once again, $4 million, if this guy doesn't work out and he's the backup or he's the 1B or barely the 1A and it's mediocre and it's back and forth between him and Forsberg, which, by the way, is much better than what it was last year anyways. So it can't get any worse, just for the record. But at $4 million, especially with a front-loaded contract, you have no issue. There's no issue whatsoever. And if you give him that extra year, okay, guess what? Like you said, if it doesn't work out, he could be shipped out easily. But most importantly, that extra year or two dropped the AAV. And especially right now with how cap-struck we are with Sanderson and Pinto needing extensions, with the DeBrincat situation and many other extensions coming up, I'm sure, like Batherson, for example, which no one's talking about. I think this is a great contract, which will provide great value moving forward. He's also 29. For goaltenders, that's very young. That's relatively young, I'd say. Goaltenders usually, I don't have to tell you this, break out into the National Hockey League at 26, 27, 25. We saw that with Craig Anderson. We see it quite often. He's 29. He's got at least 5, maybe 7 years left of good hockey. And guess what? Ottawa has basically his prime years. So I think it's only on the upswing for Korpisalo, of course, as long as he can stay healthy. And I think he can. He's not going to be relied on to start the bulk of the games. He's going to start 40 or 50, and that's all you need. And I think he can do that. That's what he's done throughout his entire NHL career. If you look at the stats, especially in front of a bad CBJ team, he started 40, 50 games on average, maybe 35 here and there, and he produced pretty solid results. So you're not looking for 60, 70 games. This is a new wave of hockey, right? You have a split by committee crease type of thing. So, 40, 50 for him, 30 to 35 to 20 for Forsberg, maybe a few here and there for Mandolisi or Sogard, and there you go. There's not going to be really any issue, in my opinion. And once again, if your biggest concern is the cap hit, $4 million, I can't stress this enough. Backups in this league are making less. Okay, making more. Pardon me, they're making far more. So because of that, if you're getting a starter for $4 million, you're basically one of the only teams in the National Hockey League to have a starter for $4 million. So I think this can really work out for Ottawa. And if you just look at his highlights, and you've seen him play many times live, his athleticism is unbelievable. The lateral movement in the crease, the way he can stretch out and make these incredible saves. I mean, it's going to be really fun to watch him, no doubt, in the crease. He's going to make a lot of diving stops, is what I've kind of gathered looking at the highlights and watching him in the past. So I'm really, 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 really looking forward to it. And once again, if you have a goaltender that's athletic and has the physical tools, you can mold him into the goaltender you want. So I think like Pierre Dorion also mentioned this, there's a lot of raw talent left with Korpisalo as well. And I think this contract, unlike Matt Murray, I think with this contract, Korpisalo is a bit younger, a little less experienced, I admit. No Stanley Cups, of course, but at the same time, unlike Murray, Korpisalo has that physical element. He's a pure athlete. No offense to Murray. I'm not saying he's not an athlete. It's just Korpisalo is so athletic. Kind of reminds me of Vasilevsky in a way, and how athletic and flexible he is in the crease, while Murray was more structured. So I think you have a lot more room to wiggle with Korpisalo to kind of mold him into what you want. So I love the contract. And most importantly, last thing I'll say, because I know I've been going on here for a couple of minutes in a row, is Ottawa didn't really have any other option. Freddie Anderson was gone. Varlamov was gone. Ronto was gone. You weren't going to sign Jari for nearly $6 million. Gibson and Hellebuck did not want to be traded to Ottawa. Good luck getting Saros or Askarov. You didn't have any other options. So you got a goalie on a, frankly, very valuable contract that might be your starter, at least for the next half decade, at a cost-effective rate when other teams were inquiring on him, when you had no other choice. So I'm very happy with this. Frankly, it could have been far worse, especially in terms of the AAV. So I'm really excited to see Korpisalo play in Ottawa. And I think, once again, that tandem has a lot of potential. Forsberg is one of the most underrated goalies in this league if you look at the advanced analytics. And I think those two will give Ottawa a chance to win every single night.
And maybe most importantly, he's the first player in Senators history whose first name is Joonas.
Ooh, write that down. Stats by Dean Brown. Besides that, hey, look, Dean, I appreciate you joining. I know it's been 50 minutes here, and I don't want to keep your Monday morning I don't want to take too much of your time this Monday morning, pardon me, but just want to gather your thoughts on all of that. So I really appreciate, you joining the show. And where can people listen to you, follow you, and read your stuff?
Well, you can listen in September when we start doing the games again on TSN1200, and I'm on Twitter, but to be frank with you, in the summertime, not very much. Yeah. So I'm around. I'll probably see you in the. I was at a movie last night, and a kid came up and said hi. So I'll see you at the store, at a movie, or wherever. I'm always around. I never leave.
Well, Dean, that's why we love you, my friend. So thank you so much for joining. You're an Ottawa legend, and we're looking forward to hearing you call many more games on TSN 1200 in September. Dean, it's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to having you on again soon. Take care. Enjoy the summer. Enjoy the cottage. And I look forward to talking soon.
Anytime, Brandon.
Take care.